This is a recording for the CUPHAT project. My name is Matthew O'Brien. Today is the 7th of August 2023 and I have here with me Billy Timmins. Thank you very much, Billy. Can you just confirm that you're happy to take part in the project?
I am happy, Matthew, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And if you wouldn't mind, could you just spell your name for the recorder, please?
Billytimmins.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Billy, could you tell me a little bit about your early life? When and where were you born and where did you grow?
Well, I was born and raised here in Baltinglass, small town in southwest Wicklow. I was born in the local hospital. You know, hard to imagine nowadays that you had kind of maternity services in Baltinglass, and we've such furore over national maternity services. But I had siblings, 3 sisters, 4 brothers. One of my siblings passed away a couple of years ago. But yeah, I was born here in the local hospital. Went to the local primary school. Our primary school consisted of 4 teachers, 2 classes of about 20 in each room. As was the case in this general area, all of the teachers were from the Western Seaboard, Kerry, Clare. So I attended my initial education there, and then for secondary education I went to Patrician College Ballyfin. I suppose based purely on the fact that there was a kind of historical connection. People from here, a lot of them went away to these middle of the road boarding schools because up until maybe about 1969, 1970, from Bleston down to Arklow, a male couldn't sit his leaving cert. It was just up to what's the equivalent now of junior cert. I think it was the group cert it was called, and that's difficult for a lot of people to visualise that was the case. There was a local convent here in Baltinglass that girls could attend, but boys, if they wanted to do their leaving cert, had to go away. So my uncles would have gone to Patrician College Ballyfin because there was a renowned brother Valerian, who was from Rathangan out the road, was a patrician brother, and that connection was there down the years. So a good few people from the area went here, or else they went to the Diocesan College in Knockbeg. Some travelled to Naas to go to school, some travelled to Tullow. Thankfully now in the general area we have a lot of vibrant secondary schools, and that necessity isn't there. It's choice if people decide to go elsewhere. But I grew up in the town itself. My family had a pub come grocer come limited hardware, I suppose, like a lot of places in similar sized towns. And to me it was a very happy upbringing, a very vibrant upbringing, very knowledgeable. I would always say to my own kids that, going into the service industry for even a couple of weeks is hugely beneficial, and someone that works behind the bar, or especially behind the bar or in a grocery counter or whatever, they end up being an agony aunt, a psychologist, a service provider. The amount of skills that you have to carry out such a task is quite amazing. But I came home then here on, obviously for holiday breaks. In those days you'd probably get a break at Halloween for a few days, Christmas, Easter, somewhere, that was it. And in the town itself, Baltinglass, I suppose the main occupation for young guys anyway was Gaelic football. There's a tremendous tradition and a very well organised a Gaelic football club here, as there is a golf club now, and soccer and whatever. I didn't play golf, I didn't play soccer at local level, but played Gaelic, and we had outdoor tennis court, basketball court, handball alley. So all of those things that occupied us at relatively little or no cost, Not like nowadays, I suppose, where things are so organised, so curtailed and limited by insurance requirements and health and safety and whatever, which are all good things in their own right. But the downside then was that the kind of carefree participation, has suffered as a result. I'm not saying that the place was full of George Best kicking balls against the wall, but it was a good life.
And did you play sports yourself then in school?
Yeah, I would have played in school. I played a bit there wasn't a strong tradition of hurling here. I played a small bit of hurling for a year or two, but I would have played Gaelic football, soccer, and that in secondary school.
And even just going back to kind of maybe some of your earliest kind of childhood memories, you mentioned that you had a happy upbringing in Baltinglass. Is there any particular story or kind of experience that stood out to you when you were a kid?
Well, in the background I grew up in, we also had a butcher shop a few doors down, okay? And I suppose there's some aspects of life when you reflect on them now, people will say, oh, God, that's a little bit gruesome. But from the point of view of the butcher shop, I remember we used to kill the sheep on a Monday evening, and fresh lamb's liver was a real delicacy. And we were kids. I remember the sheep, I was almost going to say Lord of Mercy on them, but the sheep were killed. They were stunned with a humane killer, and then they were skinned and whatever, opened up, and you'd put your hands on the cold winter's night. I remember you put your hand in, you'd pull out the liver covered in blood, and you'd race up the path with the liver to throw it in the pan, and I suppose that as a result of that, I'm not unique in that my generation. There was a lot of farming families and people were involved in such a thing. It didn't, I suppose it meant in later life that you weren't that squeamish about certain things that maybe now on reflection you should be a little bit more circumspect about. So that was that aspect. And there was also we killed our own cattle as well, and you went into the shed, they put the rope around them, they brought them in, they did the same thing, used a humane killer on them, and you always had a sense that the cattle knew what was coming. So you would have people involved in butchering and farming that have they certainly do have an attachment to their animals, and that's the downside of it. Another downside of it was actually with regard to the skins, the offal and all of that, particularly during the summer. It left a certain odour in the area which wasn't that desirable. And so you were waiting on Olivers to come from Carlow to collect the skins. You used to salt the skins, you'd put the skins out, salt them, you'd cut the offal to be taken off, and the waste product would be there. You'd have a dung hill, you put the waste product in it. We also had pigs, and my memory of dealing with the pigs is when the sow would be producing the bonds, you'd be down there late at night under the red lamp. Well, the bonds would be under the red lamp. You'd be almost under the red lamp yourself. But, excuse me, you had to, as the bonds were born, you had to pull them out from under the sow in case she'd smother them, And that was a certain thrill of that, because, the sow could have maybe 15 to 20 bonds. It was quite amazing. But the problem then arose as you fed them and they got a little bit bigger, that on occasion they might break out from, we had a kind of a local small paddock, and there were a couple of occasions where they did break out and made their way across to the churchyard, which was across the road. Did a fair rotivating job on the local parish priest's proud lawn. That wasn't too pleasant. But one memory from it which strikes me was we had to bring the sow to the boar, okay? And let's say we lived on the eastern side of the town, and the boar was out in Thorntons on the western side of the town, out to Rathvilly Road. So you'd proudly march this sow down through the town, as you did in those days. A lot of animals moved through the town, and invariably they weren't actually in their Sunday best as they walked down the town through a little bit of mud and whatever, but you were very conscious. I suppose you were at the age at this stage when you got that responsibility. You might have been 11, 12 or 13, so you were becoming a little bit aware of your own surroundings. So what we a vivid memory of letting the sow out on the road, and the sow almost knew the route to the boar, and you kind of walked on the pathway a little bit behind, as if this wandering sow was not associated with you due to its condition. So that was a memory that often sticks with me. Particularly when you went over our bridge. The bridge just had a narrow footpath on it, and it was kind of difficult to manoeuvre. So you're always petrified you might meet someone you know as you went over the bridge into Sow. But that's part of it. Then, from the point of view of the public house come shop, like, it was mainly, very little image or memory of women being in the pub. And with a small little sitting room off the pub, on occasion the woman might be in there having a gin and tonic or something, but it was mainly men. Bottled stout, draft came in, and it was an outdoor toilet. You went down the yard, there was a toilet, urinals and a toilet, a flush toilet, but it wasn't in the premises, as my mother, who's still alive, thank God, often says, in the younger days, you ate indoors and you went to the toilet outdoors. Now you go to the toilet indoors and eat outdoors. Life has come to full cycle. But the pub was an interesting thing, because the barrels of Guinness were delivered to you, and you bottled them yourself. So you put them on a a piping system, turned on the tap, and you had a mechanism where it came out into the equivalent of a basin with 5 or 6 pipes. You put the bottles in. Every publican had their own label. So if you were Matthew O'Brien or whatever, it was Matthew O'Brien, number 2 Duke Street, Athy or whatever, and you bottled your stuff, you corked it, and then you put the labels on. You put the labels on after the bottles dried out with flour and water. You mixed them and you labelled them. And I remember it was the big crates, I think maybe in 48 bottles that you'd put into it. And particularly coming up to Punchestown, we used to have a stall in Punchestown, as most of the local traders did at the time. It was before my good friend Charlie McCreevy gave the big money for them for these nice big fancy buildings now, where everyone's dressed was slightly different in those days. It was kind of bayless straw and canvas tent with your name on a bit of chipboard or something. But we'd bottle the stout, getting ready for Punchestown, and you'd also make sandwich. I remember it was ham and mustard, or maybe mustard and ham in that order actually. White bread, and you melted down the butter, or margarine probably instead of butter. And who is to know any different? Maybe the same still applies today if you're, I suppose, down in Galway races and you're out the race course. If you've had a few drinks, which I wouldn't ever take myself at the races, but a lot of people would. You know what I mean? You could be, the cuisine, can be a little bit doctored, with all due respects to providers in present day Galway or wherever. But you buttered the sandwiches and you put them in big tin foil trays, and off they went to Punchestown. But the characters, various characters came into the pub, and I remember we had a little grocery in the front, and you had the bacon slicer in the front, and you did your tea, butter, and the butter was cut and put into grease paper. And tea, again, you weighed your own tea, you put it into the little red tea bags, and fix it out, tea, bread, butter. And Graham's bread, there was a guy, Jim Mackey, was the bread man. He was from Kildare, great Kildare GA man. He used to drive the Graham's bread van, and we must have been the last stop, and I think he was friendly with my late grandfather, who I didn't know. But there would always be a pot of tea, 2 slices of toast, butter and marmalade left in the kitchen, and Jim Mackey would come in and help himself. But he used to deliver these massive big trays, the almost equivalent of the 48 bottles of stout, wooden board. He delivered these trays of batch bread, loaves, Graham's. And I remember as a kid, you'd sneak into the back of the shop that were kept in the press, and you'd weasel your hand through the actual bread and try and take out bits of the hot bread yourself, out in the middle. So I'm sure there was many a customer disappointed when they went home to discover that the heart of their bread was actually gone. Actually, it's a tradition that we've carried on in this house. If you happen to get a present of a box of roses or a milk tray from us, from this house, it's quite possible you bring it home, you'll discover that the bottom of it has been bored into, it doesn't have the full quantity. Or indeed with Easter eggs, it has been not unknown for an Easter egg to appear here, and eventually when it's open to discover that its back is gone, someone has devoured it. But I'm glad to see I'm not the only culprit, that I have been caught up myself a few times, so my kids have carried on that tradition. But I remember we had in the middle bar, and we had what we called a tap room. I assume the name came from it's where the barrels were tapped years ago. And out in the yard we had a small dairy, because before my time that milk, and before social welfare, milk was given out and people would turn up with their cans for milk. And in the dairy, which was basically just a little shed with a mesh window in it, and it had kind of marble counters in it, and the milk was kept there and the butter was kept there. Next you had your wash house, which was where all the linen was washed, and domestic clothes never ever was washed, and you had a kind of like a rotavator wheel which dried the clothes. You put the clothes through it and it squeezed them out. And then we had what we called a warehouse store, where you had brushes, flour, buckets, all those light hardware stuff you get in the hardware shop. Then we had the bottle store, where you did the bottling of the Guinness and whatever. And next to that you had the coal house, because we used to get coal delivered, and would come in a truck, be dumped outside and be shoveled into your coal house. And then on Saturday mornings you'd load up bags of coal with an old van, and you'd deliver the coal around to certain houses. As indeed with the meat as well, there were a certain number of houses you delivered meat to. And I don't want to diversify off my sheds, but also on a Sunday morning we delivered milk. I can still remember delivered one bottle of milk to the parish priest. Now a bottle was a pint, were all glass bottles. 2 bottles of milk to Dunn's, 2 bottles of milk to Barnes, and across into the old railway bridge house there's 2 elderly ladies there. We delivered 1 bottle of milk to them. So that was the Sunday morning chore. You had to deliver the milk. It was probably a historical thing that continued on. Indeed, there was a milkman delivered here in Portland up to maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Beans of Naas. It doesn't, well, I said the practice doesn't happen now, but now you can order everything online and it's delivered to you. But to come on the coal house, then we had the briquette house, and then we had the provision store. The provision store was kept the pig meal to feed the pigs. And you loved doing that as a kid because you go down, you put the meal in the bucket, you put the water through it, you might put your hand in it sometimes to mix it, and you'd lick your fingers, with the meal, I'm not saying it was like Oliver Twist or whatever. It wasn't bad. It wasn't done out of necessity. It was just a habit you had. You weren't first to take a little bit of pig meal, and you went down to the pig house and you emptied it over the wall into the trough. And it was great to see the pigs in action. Then that brings me on to, we had an orchard with apple trees, and when the apples would be ripe, we'd often go down, get the apples, and we'd put them into the pigs, and it was great to watch the pigs squabble over the apples. We also had what we called a cabbage garden, and in the cabbage garden we had carrots, cabbage, onions. So when someone came to the shop and they wanted a head of cabbage, my grandmother or the mercer would summon you and say, down for a head of cabbage. You went down with the knife, you cut the head of cabbage and you brought it up. So it was, what do you call it, from fork to plate or whatever, was very visible in those days, and I don't think too many people suffer from food hygiene issues. But that's that part of it.
So I wonder as well, you mentioned that obviously there was the pub, the kind of grocer, the butcher. Did you do a job in each, were you in each one of these?
Well, we all have very selective memories, and we probably have an image of ourselves doing a lot more than we actually did. If you were to ask one of my siblings, they would say they have no memory of being anywhere, only dodging off. I certainly didn't work in the butcher shop, but the only time I worked in the butcher shop was if I had to go out help with the delivery on a Saturday, or on late Saturday night to wash the mincing machine. You'd take apart the mincing machine, put it in hot water and wash it, or scrub the block. They were the only things, but I didn't serve. My older brother, to the best of my memory, was the only one of us that actually, the way it coincided maybe with the cycle, that he actually worked in the butcher shop and cut meat and whatever. I did not do that. In the pub, I would have worked in the grocery a little bit, but I didn't really work in the bar part of it. I was young at that stage, and we closed up for renovations in 1979-80 and didn't reopen it again until 2006-2007 when I took on the task for sentimental reasons to redo it myself.
And what would social and community life been like in the area at that time?
Yeah, just to reflect back just there 1 second, when I was talking about the pub, one of the things I found interesting was in the tap room there were some elderly people that would come in, they'd sit there with their pipe and their bottle of Guinness, and I look back, people like Jack Connors, Lord of Mercy, Mick Dugan, people who Jack Connors fought in the First World War, and in reflection now, you know what I mean, you'd say to yourself, God, I would love to have asked them X, Y, and Z, and that's why I think it's fantastic that the project you're doing has that. While what might appear too relevant to me or you today, into posterity, it is actually relevant, and you cannot beat oral history.
Sorry, I think the question was, what was kind of social and community life like in the area when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, social, like it was very, it was a very tightly knit community, and I don't think we're any different from any other community. I listened to a producer of the play on the Valley of the Squinting Windows. That book was written about Delvin in Westmeath. It's going to be on the gate in a few months, and now the author was ran out of town at the time because he told it as it was. And I suppose every community was similar like to that, like on the surface very holy and uprighteous and whatever, but underneath we all had our human failings, which manifested itself in various ways. But the obviously the role of the church, like you went, there was a morning mass every morning at 8 o'clock here. You had two masses on a Saturday. You had the benediction, two masses on a Sunday. You couldn't get a Sunday mass on a Saturday in those days. But you had the benediction then on Sunday evening, and they were all very well attended. And mass started at 11 o'clock, but people, men, would line up along the street, from around maybe 10:30. And I suppose it was the equivalent of your Twitter or your Facebook, that they interacted with one another, had their stories, they went into mass. And the aisle we had, strangely, you had a halfpenny aisle, a penny aisle, and a penny and a half aisle. And according to your social status, you took up your position in the main aisle, which kind of catered for everyone. You had on the left hand side you had women, the right hand side you had men, and it's a tradition that kind of carries on unknowingly maybe to today, not 100%, but you on the right hand side you definitely get more males, because that's where people historically have gone. There was a choir, so you got up, you carried on your daily life. Here it was a lot of small businesses, a lot of farming. There was I don't have a recollection of the street fair for cattle and sheep. I do have a recollection of the pig fair. Matty Byrne used to come down from the Circular Road in Dublin. There he lived opposite the cattle mart there in Phibsborough at Ockram Street, and he was the main buyer here, and he'd give sweets to the young fellas. You'd always be hanging around helping to run a few pigs up on the embankment, as we call it, to load them up and get a few sweets. But the life was very simple. You played your tenure as a young fella growing up. You helped around, you knocked around the town, you played tennis, you played basketball, you played handball, you played football, and you played hide and seek. And there was all little gangs in the town, but there weren't anything like a Patchen or modern day gangs. They were kind of, let's call them cordial gangs. So you hung around together, you built your hideout, and you collected your money, and you had your little picnic. And there's a local, still is a local river there, the River Slaney. During the summer you went down, you swam in the River Slaney, and very often after football training during the summer you'd come down, you get into the Slaney. It was kind of pre the shower era, so to speak. That's where you managed. But that was basically, it was nothing too mysterious. We didn't have any street festivals, we didn't have any big events. We're in an area that doesn't get that many tourists, so there wasn't that much movement. The locals, or a circus would come and set up locally for a week or two. A carnival would come, but that was about the limit of it. There was Bradley's had a local cinema here. It's hard to visualise, I suppose, when I reflect on the hospital, that a lot of small towns had hospitals, but nearly every small town had a cinema. And every Monday, Davy Bradley, Lord of Mercy, would go around with the scroll of the various films that were on for the week and put it up in the shops. And you were always waiting with excitement to see what Western was going to be on. And so you went down to Bradley's, and I think it was maybe 5p for the boards, and then 6p to go up in the soft seats. And you invariably tried to go in to the cheaper seats, and when the lights went out you crawled under the seats to try and get up to the soft seats, and where you were met with a frosty reception and sent back to where you came from, unless you could. There was an odd person that did manage to break the cord to get into the soft seats. But that was life here, and there was be an odd local dance in the local Fatima Hall, the parish hall, to be a dance, but it was a mineral bar. Like, there was no alcohol there. For people to, as they got a little bit older, a bit more sophisticated, we went over to Kilkee Castle. There was a disco there on Sunday nights where alcohol was served, and excuse me, the rugby club in Carlow people went to. But that was mainly the social outlet. Mainly was on Sunday going out to a match, or whatever. Cards was a strong tradition of card playing here, and played poker, played 25. That took place in houses and in public houses. And also on a Sunday there was a thing out in the pitch and toss, which took place every Sunday afternoon out in an area called the Red Wells at the crossroads there. And that was basically where you toss coins for money, heads and harps off a lollipop stick and whatever. And a lot of people went out there. That was their social outlet. I suppose it's a bit like, often we don't realise the importance nowadays of the social outlet and the routine An example I would always think of, I remember as a kid, the British soccer, the old First Division, every game started at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. You didn't have these Friday night games, or God forbid a Sunday game or midweek game. And you had the man in the house came home, or worked probably Saturday morning, came home, had his shower, washed up, got his dinner, and then he went out for his soccer match, and he had his pints of harp or whatever he had afterwards, and that was his outing. In the British, in many respects, we weren't dissimilar in that we had it on the Sunday. You came, and you got your Sunday dinner, you went out to your match, your pitch and toss, you maybe went out walking your greyhounds, a big tradition of greyhounds here, or you went to the racing. Those activities that people had, which carry on to this day. Well, they may actually be declining in, as you can see by the people attending greyhound racing and people attending horse racing. It's a number certainly have declined, and it is a battle because as younger people have more diversification, because like on a bank holiday August in Baltimore, that's 50 years ago, people were staying local. Nowadays, in a bank holiday August, if they're not down in Temple Bar or Galway, they're in Lanzarote or Chicago or somewhere for the weekend. It's changed a lot, and the items or the things that people can spend their money on have greatly enhanced. People spend a lot of money on phones. They all have cars. At those special holidays, those special going off to the Champions League final, the Rugby World Cup, things that weren't in countenance in my day growing up. Any money that you might earn or have was spent locally on socialising, going out to the local pub or going to your match or whatever.
And we might come back to some of those changes a little bit later on. You alluded to meeting interesting people, and you were kind of many things to many people in the various different shops and butchers and pubs. I wondered, were there any really interesting characters or stories that you came across during your time in these places?
Well, the individual stories of people, say from World War One, I had a very limited memory of them because I didn't extend them to the thing. But you barely, you didn't take on the enormity of them on reflection. Now, the one or two would talk about the hardships that they had and the difficulties. And my father, I remember, was involved in politics, and he used to hold a clinic every Saturday night. Okay, started around maybe 7:30. But he held it in the house, so he had a small little office in the front of the house. But when people were waiting to go in, they came in, and we might be sitting, as everyone did in those days, watching the late or whatever was on at 8 o'clock on Saturday night. So we'd be sitting there as a family, and you could have these 3 or 4 other people sitting there with you, engaging with you, and without going into all the details, I suppose the stories you would hear from people are not necessarily difficulties or whatever, were quite funny and quite humorous. But I suppose the stories that would stick with you were, no more than your own recall of young times, what people did years ago. And only last night I was out locally last night. I was talking to one gentleman, and he was saying how the young people nowadays, they're so well behaved and that, etc. He said, as opposed to, he said he remembers when he was young, he was a man my own age, in his early 60s or whatever. He remembers on Christmas Eve and people out fighting on the streets outside the pubs, And we now have an image that there's a lot of street violence and a lot of, which there is. I suppose it's more serious now because people kick, they use implements, they use knives, they use guns or whatever. In those days it was a fist fight, but like the old fight wasn't, it's not something new, it went on all the time. With regard to interesting stories, I suppose around here there was a couple of things. There was during the Civil War there was an ambush here out at Graney, about between here and Castledermot. We're right on the Carlow-Kildare border here, and Wicklow, the 3 counties kind of converge. But that was always a thing in the back of the mind, but people didn't speak about the exact details. There was one local man, Ned Nolan, who I remember as a kid myself, and he was shot and wounded in that descent. He was left for dead at it, but one of the people on the opposing side, on the anti-treaty side, knew him and verified that he was dead when he wasn't dead. And that was a local story. You were conscious of the Civil War and the Graney ambush. We also had here in Baltimore in the 1950s a thing which was put into, I can't think of the author now, was it Lawrence or something, the Battle of Baltinglass, which was a dispute about a post office, the handover of a post office. Post office was held by two elderly ladies, the Cook sisters, and the natural progression they felt was to hand it on to their niece, Miss Cook. This was back, I don't know, around 1950-51, but the inter-party government came in, replaced Fianna Fáil, and the post office was very much a political appointment. And the post office went to a man called Ben Farrell, who was a popular hardware owner in the town. But there was a kind of revolt against this. I suppose it was kind of proxy political battle on reflection. But that caused a lot of division and difficulty here at the time. And you know, even like this is what now, nearly 70 years later, I'd say probably only now the wounds of that are, you know, for some people are you know, just over time, probably it's probably through lack of memory more so than anything else. But at the time, local people hired a Cessna aircraft that dropped leaflets in Dublin, went up and picketed it all, and it nearly brought the government down for something that, you know, I'm not in a position to judge the rights or wrongs of it. Like, there was good people on all sides doing what they thought was for right reasons, but it was very sad that it caused such unnecessary division, you know. But then I suppose politics was a lot more, I won't say competitive, but it was a lot more emotional coming out, I suppose. There was maybe 30 years after the Civil War, and there was lots of bitterness there that you weren't aware of. And it's very often on that general thing, although I don't think it was applicable in this area, but across the country by and large, you know, there's often I think that historians kind of conflate the fight for freedom and the Civil War and independence with local feuds over land and that. And it's only, you know, the more we go in and look at the archival material, we discover that, well, things weren't as straightforward as we think they were. And, you know, they always said the victors write history, but in my view, everybody rewrites history. Losers, victors, the whole lot, and everyone sees things through their own eyes. If you or I witness an incident now, and if we both to go and recall what happened, we'll have different interpretations of what happened for no other reason other than that we've ingrained prejudices or certain things mean more to us, and they're the things we place the emphasis on. So you can imagine what it's like dealing with historical matters which were dealing with life and death, transfer or abuse of property, you know, several decades later, indeed 100 years later. It's very, very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of people at that time.
And how would you describe Baltinglass today to somebody who's never been here before?
Baltinglass is a nice town to grow up in. It's good schools, it's good clubs. There's a very good golf club here. I don't play golf myself. There's lots of opportunities in it. It's idyllically set between the river and the hills. But it didn't benefit from the Celtic Tiger due to the strong, that's what you could call it, protective planning laws we had, which, you know, have advantages on one hand, disadvantages on the other hand. We didn't get an influx that we probably needed, you know, to make it a more vibrant, self-sustaining town. I do think we're on the cusp of it at the moment. But the issue with regard to the broader issue for, we'll call it Southwest Wicklow, basically from Bleston down through West Wicklow, through Dunlavin, Baltinglass, Carnew, over as far as Rathdrum, Tinnahealy. One of the problems we have that we don't have a Kilkenny Castle. We have Palafuca, we don't have a Lakes of Killarney, we don't have Clonmacnoise, but what we have are a myriad of lovely little towns, okay, but the dots aren't joined together. A number of years ago, about 10 years ago, a policy was launched on it was to be a driving route between Wicklow and Kildare. And I was in politics at the time, and the draft of it came out, and south of Hollywood, down as far as Wooden Bridge, there was nothing on it. And I got on to Falch Ireland at the time and drew up a little thing based on Robert Frost, The Road Less Travelled, and put in routes on it. Now, thankfully, they eventually did include these routes in the policy. There was a launch of the policy, the documentation was produced, but the signage, the stopping off points, the whole thing, the project was just dropped. It never took place. And really, I think the strength of this whole area is joining the equivalent of your Ring of Kerry. And I went out into politics first in 1997. I remember drawing up a document the year after, giving it to the Minister for Tourism, the concept of, with regard to Wicklow specifically, a 2-day ring, a 1-day ring, a half-day ring. To get one of our difficulties here is on the doorstep of Dublin. We don't have many bed nights, certainly didn't have, so people are inclined to go back to Dublin, but it was to get those Dublin people to come out. And so when they left Dublin, they weren't just going, obviously tourism in Wicklow was L-shaped. You came down the N11, you went over to Glendalough, and you turned around and went back. People didn't realise there are lots of other places you can go to, really nice. Like, we could be the Cotswolds of Ireland, this area. Now, in the last number of years, thanks to the Archaeological department at UCC, they started excavations on the Rathcorn and the hill over Baltiness in the background. And it would look like we call ourselves now the hill fort capital of Ireland. Like, in most places, it's rare to find, where there are hill forts, it's rare to find a second hill fort. To date, 9 or 10 hill forts have been identified in this area. But it's trying to get that message out there. This area could be as historical as Brúnaboinne, the Boyne Valley, the Cage of Fields. We're on a par with them, but we don't have the tourist infrastructure, and there needs to be a drive at national political level to create this awareness. The potential is unlimited. I've tried over the last number of years myself to push it, to get the thing going. There's a problem with access to the hill forts, because you're dealing with private property, but to get a centre going, but it's a continuous battle. Actually, if I had one ambition, I would like to be the Minister for Tourism and Sport for a couple of years, to right the wrongs that have been done to this area over the number of years, where the whole emphasis was on as a supply chain to Dublin, people working in the services industry in Dublin, rather than, you know, having our own facilities located here. If you look out the window there, you can see, you know what I mean, you can almost see the river one side, you can see the hill the other side. You know, fantastic scenery. If I was driving up through the Lake District in England, I drove into a town like Baltimore, I should say, wow. Now, things have improved. There are people doing a lot of good. It is incremental. I know that the Lake District has a 700 or 800 year head start on us, but we will get there eventually. And I'd like to think that, you know, in the next few years, that we would. But funding was allocated, thanks to Michael Ring, the Department of Rural Affairs. Maybe close to 3 million was allocated. It'll be 4 years next October to Baltiness to change the streetscape. Nothing was done. Well, I'll rephrase that. There was consultants' reports and scheme drawn up, but nothing physically was done. By the time it came along and went out to tender, the job had gone from 3 million to 6 million. So nothing has started yet. So it's heartbreaking to have so much effort put into doing something now. This is my little crib in, I think it is important for me to recall this though. The Department of Rural Affairs was drawn up to help areas that were in more need. And I remember speaking to Michael Ring at the time about it, and I said, it was like our Lord, he didn't come for the well, he came for the ill or sick or the sinners, okay? And we're the sinners in this case. So he didn't come to further boost Westport, he came to give Ballyhaunis a lift. And the Wicklow didn't come for Glendalough to give it a lift, it came to rise up the likes of the West Wicklow area. Now Glendalough is fantastic, world renowned site, it's really important we keep it going right. But my argument would be the money will always be found for Glendalough and their various schemes. But Glendalough was the recommendation from the local authority for this funding. And maybe had 3 or 4 projects. And in fairness to Michael Ring, he saw the bigger picture and channeled the funding to the Baltinglass project, okay? I regret to say that now, almost 4 years later, the 3 or 4 items that were listed for Glendalough to be done have actually been done. Don't ask me where the money came from, okay? Whereas the area that the money was allocated for has none of them done. Local parks, some work done out from local resources, but 4 summers have gone and still nothing. And that is really, really frustrating. What it does then is it disenfranchises a local community. You know, it makes them resentful, that they feel like they're left behind. And it's not a theory that I bought into in the past during my time, but I have to say, I've witnessed the last couple of years, I find it really, really frustrating that this is the case. Hopefully, if this tape is ever produced and someone listens to it, by the time they hear it, that we will have our work done, because I just think that its potential is unlimited.
And what are those 4 sites?
Sorry?
What are those 4 sites that you mentioned?
Well, the 4 sites to see this. See, one of the problems, a lot of things are driven by local authorities, okay? And one of the problems is this, the main people in the local, the top positions in the local authority here are all based on the far side of Wicklow. This is where the population is. So we're seen as a kind of an add-on off there in the distance. And it's like the crying child. The crying child will always get the biscuit, okay? The quiet child in the corner won't get the biscuit, okay? And we're just maybe that little bit far away to make a difference to the authorities. But if you could stand back and look and see what potential there is in the area by drawing up, follow my talk from you, I produced a small booklet that I called The Road Less Travelled with 10 locations on it, but following my talk with you here this morning, I would think maybe the next few weeks I'll go back at it myself and just try and draw up a basic plan and put it out there again to get people thinking about it, talking about it. But it's like I've attended several meetings down the years here, these kind of brainstorming where the same things keep coming up, and when there isn't good. I was in the army for a while, and I served in Cyprus, and I remember there was an Australian policeman there of Irish extraction, Tim Egan. He always said, what good is faith without good works, and like people's faith is beginning to wane around the areas that don't see the good works.
And actually, on that point, what role do you think upland communities can play in developing tourism?
Yeah, like I think the Uplands organisation in Wicklow, the Wicklow Uplands, has done a lot of really, really good work, and they've, tied down the concept of the national park and the extension of it and whatever. And we're kind of on the periphery of the national park here, but the one of the things that could be done by the Uplands, and they have done a lot of good work, okay, the main artery, the M9, goes maybe 6 or 7 miles west of here, okay. There is no signage on the M9 directing you across Wicklow to the Glenmalure area, the Glendalough area. Now, under legislation, to have your brown signage, you have to have certain qualifications, certain criteria. And one of the things is for a tourist attraction, it has to be within so many kilometres of the road and have so many visitors. Well, the Wicklow National Park meets that criteria. And I have been on to in its previous existence, the NRA, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, various ministers, and brought it up, I made submissions to the County Development Plan to put a signage south of Castledermot directly into Wicklow National Park and north of Kilcullen directly into National Park, instead of having the guy or girl or family or whatever driving up from Waterford up into Dublin, out along the M50 and down the M11. Defies logic to me what's not being done, but you get a growing frustration that sometimes I feel like getting a sign myself and going out and putting it up in the middle of the night, because it is very, very difficult to do. So that's a foresight, a small little thing that could make such a difference. Like if I'm driving in England or I'm driving in the States, I'm not going to go off Little Mary the back roads trying to find something. I'll follow the road signage, and that's it. You don't have the local knowledge, or you don't want to end up going down a cul-de-sac or an unsafe area. And that's something that could be done very, very easily.
And you mentioned your road less travelled document. If you had a group of tourists and you were bringing them out, where would you bring them in this area?
Well, in this area, like you could go, and the local historical society produced a small little booklet, leaflet of a kind of walking tour of Baltinglass. I know there's a young girl from South Africa that's in the area now. She's looking at setting up the walking tours. So if you're in this area, where would you recommend? If I had a family that came to me and had a car and they said, bring us around the area, okay, you've Rusborough House in Blessington, which is very nice as well, worth a visit. You've the Glen of Amal, which is the equivalent of Glendalough or Glenmalure, but the difficulty is that the army have their artillery range there. So if you're not familiar with it, you go up to Glen of Man, you see these signs saying danger, beware, and there have been fatal accidents up there with youngsters have been killed in the past, and so there is that fear that you're going into a dangerous area. But it's a thing that can be, well, if it's managed, it's very safe. I did seek in the past to make the night shoots that take place. The army carry out night shoots, which are quite spectacular. Use artificial lighting and they fire the tracer rounds or whatever to make that as a tourist attraction, almost like your sound and light show at the pyramids. And but I didn't get a good response because the natural inclination of the military, well, look, we don't want the camp civilians coming up. We don't want them around the place. They're danger. But I think that could really be coordinated to be a real good attraction for the area. So I'm familiar with the Glen of the Mal myself, so I'll bring them up to the Glen of the Mal and show them the sites up there, because you're looking over to Nicola, show them the artillery base, and which is there, I suppose, the range. Maybe it's about 120 years they were set up by the British, okay? Then I could bring them to the Cistercian Abbey in Baltinglass again. Nice attraction, but relatively unknown. Difficulty for a tour bus with parking. There was opportunities in the past for the council to purchase some land that could have facilitated that. Didn't come to fruition. Okay, if our courthouse here has been, I suppose, it's the subject of different desires by different people. But I would like to see it developed as a kind of interpretive centre, because you have to have somewhere to go that you can say to people, look, at this is it, and then go out and look at it. And the real attraction here are the hill forts, but we don't have it. It's very embryonic, the development of the hill forts. I'd say most of them are in private property. One of them may be shared state agencies. It's about getting access to even one of those, getting your interpretive centre, getting access to one of those hill forts. There's a tremendous opening there for tourists. So that's where I would go. Then I would, I may bring them over to Glendalough, fall into the old trap, may go to Glenmalure, but you can go to this beautiful little villages, Grange Con, Kilteague and Stratford, all around the vicinity, show people a tour. You have Ratwood, which is a fantastic facility down in South Wicklow now, but when that was going to the local councillor there, Vincent Blake, and I know that he had to do a lot of hard work in the background to get that through the planning process, which is, to get extensions to it, which to me is mind-boggling. We have a shortage of hotels in the area. I know a couple of applications went in the past, but are very strict planning laws, that didn't encourage them. I think you need to have a proactive approach by our local authority. They haven't adopted that proactive approach. When someone goes in for an economic development, the thing is they would see, does it comply, which is fair enough, but how can we not? It's not a case of going out to assist in the development. It's telling you all the reasons why we can't have it that way, but they won't come along and say, well, maybe you should do it the other way. I don't want to sound too critical, but local authorities have to have a greater awareness of economic necessity, and there is a balance to be got. And I think, we have tilted the balance in recent years more in favour of the snail or the badger as opposed to the human.
And on that note, just in terms of natural heritage, what do you think are the most important aspects of natural heritage in Wicklow?
Well, I suppose this now will sound contradictory to what I've been saying earlier. It's great to drive around Wicklow and see the actual the topography and the landscape as opposed to driving into the Dingle Peninsula and you're hit with all these houses and different colours and all over the place, or driving into Donegal or parts of it, or even driving out from the Coast Road out to Spiddle, out to Clifton and the Coast Road in Galway, and say, God, to destroy the thing. We have, and I'll take my hat off to the planners of this thing, they have preserved the thing very well, with the exception of the planting of the planting works by Quilcha, okay? I think that we have actually obscured many fine views in this county with the approach that Quilcha have adopted by planting, and we need to have a greater awareness of the impact down the road of their planting policy. Several views around the place have been hindered upon, and I think that what we could do is that we could have a lot of viewing points, pull-in points around the county picnic areas. That can be done. Limited resources can do that to make you more aware. But it's like it's all evolution really. And you ask about biodiversity, and we see the controversy recently about the lawn in the front of Trinity College. They have their long traunees and their bees buzzing around the place, which is all great. But one thing I have to say is, if you go back and look at historical homesteads, rural homesteads, farming homesteads, there might have been, by necessity, were beaten off the road. They had their avenue. They had their avenue in. The side of the avenue, you had maybe a yard or a metre with a row of daffodils, okay, right up. But you had your sheep almost up grazing to the window for two reasons. One, the land was valuable, okay. Two, they hadn't the time to manicure the lawns. Nowadays, we have houses, with lawns, and the whole effort is cutting the lawn. It's a major challenge, And maybe we need to go back looking at the redesign of these vast lawns, which in theory look postage stamp and are nice, but aren't, generally from a diversity point of view and environment point of view, they're not assisting really, that they're too manicured, and maybe it could be more, that they're damaging. We may go back maybe and look at, even in my own case here now, I'm looking at the lawn there, and the last year or so I have thought maybe of moving in the fence from the field next door and let it be grazed or let it be wild, rather than spending time, energy and money mowing it to keep it down instead of letting it take its natural course. Now, having said that, I suppose you don't like, there's nothing worse than driving into a place you got that's unkept. He didn't bother his barney to mow the lawn, but maybe in time. But I would like to see maybe some of our, with the rural-urban divide and the use of land and access. I'm always very conscious from a farming point of view, and a lot of urban people can't understand why they can't walk across their land, And I always use an example without intending to be cynical or flippant, that the day I go up to Parkin in All Ireland and I can go in and have my picnic in one of the gardens on the way down to Crow Park, it'll be the day I'd say, well, that's fine, you can come out and walk the hills of Wicklow freely. Equally, I'd say with regard to the biodiversity, when I drive down through Cabinteely or Fox Rock, and I look in over the wall and I see the gardens, be let grow wild, and then the briars and the rose bushes around the place, and say, well, that's good, we're all buying into this, But I'm not an advocate of my neighbour needs to buy into biodiversity, but I'll stay as I am, Something we've all got to do.
And what do you think may be the biggest threats to nature in these uplands, or the biodiversity? What do you think those threats are?
Well, I suppose the threat is twofold. And one, that you have agricultural development, the reclamation of land and trying to make it more economically productive. The set aside came in a number of years ago to try and address that. But human nature being what it is, there's people will always try and maximise the economic return they get. Are we in a position as a state to compensate people for leaving land idle? We have to try and get a balance. So the threats to it are one is the economic development of agriculture, which is difficult to like, if you were to say to a hotelier or someone running a bed and breakfast or someone selling cups of coffee, hang on a sec, you can only sell 30 cups today now because you're using cups, and to recycling you can't sell 50. You know what I mean? You have got to bring it down to the end of the day, economics are really, really important, and it's that ingrained will in all of us to survive, to better ourselves. It's easy to talk from a comfortable position about what other people should do. Mitchell always tells the great story about the socialists, but I won't bore you with that. But the bottom line, the punchline in it was where the socialist was, a guy was explaining to a guy what socialism was, and it was, if I had 2 holidays, I'd give you one. I'd only take one myself. If I had 2 houses, I'd give you one. And he says, well, what about 2 bikes? If you 2 bikes, he said, I have 2 bikes, so that doesn't count, And so our efforts into biodiversity and that, are something similar. Like when Rishi Sunak flies from London up to Inverness or whatever and talks about the environment, it's hard to take him serious. But I suppose it's the educational thing for all of us.
And you mentioned earlier on the kind of the hill forts. and other kind of archaeological sites as well. Would you have a favourite kind of spot in this area? Was there anything that has
Well, I suppose historically there was a cross put up. I don't think it was put up in they call it the Marian Year Cross. I don't think it was put up in the Marian Year here. And it lights up at night time, and it's red and the sign of a cross. If you weren't from the area, you'd think it was the old fable about the red cross in the sky and the end of the world. I remember as a kid actually going up on the Castlenermond Road, and this guy pulled in the truck, and he said, it was in winter time, he said, that red cross, so what's the story with that? I said, and that's there all the time. God, he said, I was just wondering, because you can't see the hill, you just see this red cross, it looks like it's up in the sky. So that, and it leads on to the pinnacle, and that they'd be the places, that historically as a kid you went up to the cross, up to the pinnacle. Some people go nowadays, but there's problems with, naturally enough, with access and whatever. The place I'd go down to the Abbey, but there's the local towns committee set up recently under Terry Kenny, and in fairness, she's done a lot of good work. There's a walk up there, the golf links there, really nice walk. The park, before it was to go under its renovation, was an attractive park. You can walk up by the River Slaney. So hopefully in time that will be utilised, but they'll be the places I'd go in the immediate vicinity of Baltiness. As I said before, you can go up to the Glen of Amal, and you can walk through Coastal Uplands up there, and go out towards Rotdangan, you can go up to Mount Cadine, and a lot of people from here, well, I won't say a lot, but a number of people go up Lough Nequilla regularly enough here. Now, I haven't been up it myself in a number of years, but they're the attractions. Like the nearest seaside resort to us is in Ballymoney in North Wexford, outside Gorey. It's about 40 minutes away, where British Bay is maybe 60 minutes, 65 minutes, and then it's always very, very busy there during the summertime.
And how much would you consider yourself to be from the Wicklow Mountains? What significance does that hold?
Well, three of my grandparents are from the west of Ireland, two from Galway, one from Mayo, but my grandfather on the Timmins side are Wicklow, and like that, where I grew up on the side of the street in Baltinglass, I suppose it would have been a lease in those days since 1852, and I'd be big into genealogy, and I suppose I can trace the family back here to around maybe 1820, 1830, but I can't, due to lack of records, go back any further than that. I'm not sure if they, if they came from the Carlow area or from here they branched out to the Carlow area, but I would have carried out the DNA test myself, and it's quite intriguing to look at all the connections. But I would consider myself, yes, to be very much Wicklow. I'm not living in the centre of the Wicklow Hills. I always talk about, Wicklow, while we have a huge interest in sport, all sports, and especially maybe Gaelic football, we are one of two counties, ourselves and Fermanagh, that never won a provincial title. Wicklow were last in a Leinster final in 1897. 1897, we have never won one. But I often thought, if we did win a Leinster final, where would we bring the cup back to? Because there's no kind of centre, there's no, like the county grounds are in Aughrim, which is, kind of down the southwest in one periphery. Lara, you could say, maybe geographically is the centre of it, so it's very hard. It's not like, say, if Offaly win, they go to Tullamore, Kilkenny win, they're in the city, the Doves win, they're in wherever, Smithfield, or wherever they go, to Kerry or in Killarney. But the Wicklow concept, I always think that the real heart of Wicklow, if I can look at it objectively, probably is from maybe Kilbecannock into Lara, Roundwood, down towards Rathdrum, Glenmalure, Wooden Bridge. That kind of vein, I would say, is the real heart of Wicklow. All the rest of it, ourselves included, although I would consider myself to be Wicklow through and through, and that's it. The next generation, the kids are probably a little bit more cosmopolitan, but they would always say, when you're talking on the phone to someone from Wicklow, your accent changes, like going to upland mode. But I'm going to always use, from the point of view of my experience in politics, if I call to a house in Blessing and they're not at home, they're in Tallaght or in Naas, I go to Dunlavin or Naas, I go to Baltiness or in Carlow, I go to Tinahely or in Gorey. You go to Archaeological, it could be in Wexford, and you go to Brer Greystones, they're in Dublin. It's a county that looks outwards. We're the last county created, and I won't say we're made up of bits and pieces, we're everything, but we're like the human body in a way. A lot of us physically on the periphery, the heart, I'd say yes, the Lara, Kilmac, into, that's where you get the really kind of strong Wicklow accent, a real strong Wicklow association. And the rest of us, all of us on the periphery, we're, you know, taken out in different directions as opposed to looking in, we're looking out. But that's due to the nature, I suppose, of the geographic thing of the hills, you know. But, you know, there's, you know, also too, like the use of language. Now, I'm not an expert on it, but I see, you know, in that part, the kind of Elizabethan English or the sayings, the speech of people, you know, I think there's tremendous potential for a study. Maybe one has been carried out of how people speak in that area. You know, we've lots of, they're not, I won't say shortcomings, let's call them characteristics. Maybe they're not uncommon to Wicklow, but you know what I mean? It's not unusual for people to refer to the national anthem or burn to a cylinder. You know, we have those things, you know, and again, man, they're probably widespread, maybe, you know, or you know, is a, you know, is a not, you know, speaking with the diction that others might speak with. Is that a characteristic or is it a shortcoming? I don't really know, but I mean, all I know is like we have a very distinctive accent in Wicklow, as they do in South Kilkenny, as they do in Cork or Connemara, and I would be very, very proud of it, very proud of the fact that we're from Wicklow. I remember a friend of mine in Dublin, a very well educated man, it's telling me that, you know, the big desire in Dublin was to have a Wicklow registration car, you know, and so, you know, it's a really desirable place to live. And the latest survey showed that house prices are the dearest in Ireland and Wicklow, which surprised me that it surpassed Dublin. I don't think that will last long, but that's what the problem with Wicklow is, the supply, you know, wouldn't be great due to the planning laws and restrictions and population and that. But yeah, no, Wicklow is, you know, it's a very strong county identity. Notwithstanding that we're not on the podium in Crow Park that often, but you know, we have guys that play, Josh Van der Flyer, Jack Conan now, and we've gone off to the World Cup, wish to do them well, with lads under 20s down the years and that, so. And we've a lot of poets, a lot of literary history. I often thought that that's a thing we should look at. Now, a lot of them mightn't necessarily have been born in Wicklow or raised in Wicklow, but you know, long association, like with, say, like James Joyce, Militant Singh, Seamus Heaney, you know, you know, various, Sebastian Barry, you know, lives out in mine and that, you know, there's a whole sequel of people who live in the county. I often thought again we could look at creating a literary trail.
Yeah. What's the best thing about living in an upland area?
You know, when I was in the Dáil, I would stay in Dublin maybe Tuesday, Wednesday night. Traffic was very bad. It's back bad again now, okay. And there was, like, you know, a certain, like in all cities, like people walk faster in Dublin than they walk in Cork. They walk faster in London than they walk in Dublin. They walk faster in New York than they do in London. But the air, the cloudiness. When I used to come home on a Thursday evening, particularly in the autumn, you parked the car and you got out and you just took a breath of the air and you looked out at the greenery, or in the case of the autumn, the golden leaves, the scenery, and you just thought this kind of magic feeling of fresh air, of natural beauty, of hills and rivers that have been there for thousands of years and hopefully will be there for thousands of years after you're gone. That feeling of being home, being amongst your own, being able to go out, walk down the town, know people, you know, just understand that you're part of a tradition and a history of a locality, you know, that's community based. That's the real good feeling about living. And I'd like to think that people that have moved into this area, we have a number of Ukrainians here at the moment, it's a topical subject. We a number of Kosovars set up here at the Balkan War, after the Balkan War in the late 90s, and they've integrated tremendous to the community, made a tremendous contribution. And I think that's really important. And I think that in time, when we look back, we'll see it's okay, a large number of Ukrainians will return to Ukraine, but a certain number will stay here due to, the stability, the political stability of the area. Like I get, when I see this irrespective of who's in government, when I see this non-stop criticism, and it's one of the faults we have in Ireland from a political point of view, that, we're continuously knocking, but it can put people into a state of despair. People can get the impression that, God, I live in an unfair society. But like, we've one of the most progressive tax systems in the world. We've a tremendous country, we've tremendous potential, and I think that people, like in 10, 15, 20 years time, we look back at the Ukrainian people that have stayed here, will have made a tremendous contribution to our society and communities, as they are doing at the moment. I would know a number of them, and they're real positive contributors. I often think in the case like Steve Jobs, his dad was Syrian, and where would we be? Like, where would the States be? Where would we be without Steve Jobs? That creativity and genius of an individual. So we talk about physical biodiversity and the topography and the natural environment, but the human diversity, in my view, is equally as important.
And so, how else has Baltinglass changed from when you were younger to now, through your political career to now?
Yeah, well, one of the ways that has really changed is that while it has remained relatively small and probably has just got maybe about 200 or 300 new houses in the last 20 years, people don't know one another like they used to. And that certainly is, that's not a positive thing. They don't know each other like they used to. Like one time, now I suppose there's also the fact that when you're younger, you're inclined to know everyone that's older than you. That's also a factor. So maybe as you get older, you feel that people don't know one another. But I do know that very often people don't know their neighbours. So they're gone to work early. They're not standing outside the church on a Saturday morning. Those that do go to church drive in and out of a parking area now. And there isn't that same interaction unless you're involved in a club, be it the soccer, the Gaelic, the golf, or whatever. So that point of view, it's changed, that people in the community don't all know each other. One of the things about Baltimore is that there's tremendous groups, tremendous organisations, but we don't have that overall umbrella of a group to bring all the energies together. That's one thing that there's a shot now. I don't know if that's possible to achieve. Maybe it's the same in every community. It's when you see I see Hollywood Village, small degree up the way, how they combine and they operate together in a tremendous way. So maybe it's just part of the evolution as a community becomes more diverse. That lacks. So I suppose the main thing would be people don't know one another. On the plus side, the train ran through here. Freight train until about 1959. I think the passenger train finished up in the early 30s. But even in the last, I left Baltinglass, I was in the army, I returned back here in the early 90s. And even then we were a little bit isolated from Dublin, but certainly due to improvement in roads, due to, I suppose, greater involvement of people working in Dublin, we've almost become a commuter town. Access to Dublin psychologically has become much nearer in the last 20, 30 years than it was in the past. Particularly the western side of Dublin. It's so accessible now. You go out the road here for 10 minutes and you're on the M9 and you're up, and you're in City West in no time at all.
And what challenges do you think that communities in the Wicklow Mountains will face in maybe the short or the long-term future?
Well, one of the challenges is people become more conscious of their health, and more people are out participating in hill walking and hiking and so on, to kind of protect and make sure that there's an awareness, a healthy respect for the actual landscape, because it's not so much the actual physical impact they'll have on the landscape, but the psychological impact they'll have on the local community, where local communities will start to resent people coming into the area if they don't actually respect the area. And I think it's really important that the Uplands Council work in conjunction with I'm not sure if it's the Arts Heritage and the Gaelic or the OPW, the Wicklow way, I just can't recall. Like Wicklow Way, we're talking about greenways all over the country, and have been fantastic benefit. Greenways, blueways, the one down in Waterford, particularly through Dungarvan, has changed the whole place of that. But we have in Wicklow the Wicklow Way, which is unique. It's there, it's in position, but it has been neglected over recent years. And I'd like to see the Uplands Council maybe take that. I don't think it's under their wing at the moment, but I'd like to see maybe a revamp or a re-look at that Wicklow Way to actually, let's say, modern. Like the signage on it is poor. I've done walked it myself. I've gone astray in a few places, and I can read a map. So I didn't just rely on the signs, but I did go astray in one or two places. A few turns you can miss. The signs are in poor condition. But I think we've got to re-look at trying to reroute it slightly and bring it through the towns, okay? Now, people will argue that the uniqueness of it is that it stays in the wilds all the time, but to me, so that local people can see the benefit of it. And even if I'm walking the Wicklow Way, I'd like to be able to go through the little village, stop down, have the cup of coffee. Like it was taken out of Lara and brought just slightly north of the village. I think that maybe that might have been, I know I had an input into that. It was a wrong decision. It comes to the outskirts of Tinnahealy, it skirts, it goes on towards Mulnacuff, and that it should go through Tinnahealy, it should go through Shillelagh, like it ends up in Clonegall. They're the things, because while the countryside is lovely and that's great for people, it's lovely for them to have a memory of stopping in Tinnahealy, stopping in Shillelagh. And I think that needs to actually be done with a small little bit, even if it means putting a spur off it or as a break. You can go on, if they feel, well, we can't physically get it or we can't rejoin in or whatever. But I'm sure where there's a will, there's a way. So I'd like to see that with the Wicklow Way. So that's a challenge, trying to get cohesion between the local community and people that come out to use it. I think also we've got to look at more centres, you need some more attractions in the area, particularly in the southwest area where someone can drive to. Now, I spoke earlier about the attraction being the linked village thing, let's call it the linked village chain, but within that you need a recognised centre or somewhere like your Ratwood. At the end of the day, people go out but they remember the cup of coffee, they want to use the toilet, they might want to buy a little souvenir. You have to have that centre, you're not going to wander around for 5-6 hours in the wilderness and go back home. To really make the experience, you need your interpretive centre. Now, there was an effort made to put an interpretive centre up in Luggalaw a number of years ago that ended in certain controversy. I'd like to think we have the maturity to see the benefits of such a centre. I often thought outside Baltinglass, Dirty Castle Road, you have a great viewing point. You can see some of the hill forts, sometimes done out in that area. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Fuerteventura, the island right in the top, on the peak, the highest peak of that. It's an interpretive centre. So you go up to the highest peak, you go into your interpretive centre, you have your 360-degree glass window that you can look about, and it's tremendous to be able to see the whole island. We need a couple of those in the area. But again, that can only be driven by national vision. National vision can only be spurred by local authority, and that's where we come back to the weakness. But it's not something that we should fall down in front of. It's something that we just keep banging on, keep going, and someday it will happen.
And just in closing then, what does it mean to you to be from and living in this area?
Well, I'm always proud to say I'm from Wicklow. I'm always proud to say I'm from Baltinglass. And I suppose it's like when you're abroad, you're proud to be from Ireland. And when I'm in Baltinglass, I'm proud to say I live in Trahan. You know what I mean? It's like who's the best baker in the world or the best baker in the street, No, I am very happy with my identity. And I think, I see the younger generation, on the face of it, they don't have the same association with the sense of where they're from because their world is global, as opposed to local. But yet when the crunch comes, I see it with my own kids, that when they're somewhere, they're very proud to say they're from Wicklow, they're from Baltinglass, they're from Ireland, or when they're abroad. Only actually yesterday I got a photograph of one of my kids who's abroad in the States where he met someone from Wicklow and he was so glad to have that association. Home, that's home, community, locality, town, parish, county. It all has different levels of bonding, and everyone is as you know, if you drive to some parts of this country, if you drove through, you'd say, God, I wouldn't like to live here, whatever. But yet, if you find a native at that place to say, there was nowhere like growing up like where I was, you know, and that's why you see families, people travel the world, get married, come back, have their kids here, and they say, well, I want my kids to have the same upbringing as I had. It gives you a basis, it gives you roots, it gives you a sense of being. And that's equally applicable to the many families that have moved into the area in recent years. I see their kids going on wearing the green and white, a Bolton class, or the blue, the soccer club, or whatever. It's great to see.
And is there anything else that you'd like to add to the record that we haven't previously discussed?
I'm sure there's loads of things I'd like to say, then there'll be afterwards when you go out and think, God, I should have said that, should have said this, you know. I probably talk a little bit too much, so maybe it's no harm that I'm finishing up. But no, I think I've covered that. Just you know, I hadn't driven around the county in the last year since COVID. You know, people haven't been around much, but I had occasion to drive around there in the last couple of weeks. And I remember I came home and I said, wow, I said, God Almighty, you know, I said it's wonderful to live in such a county as Wicklow. You stand back and just take it in. It's breathtaking. And to drive out, to go down from here up to Ratdangan, down to Auckland, to Rathdrum, maybe up to Lara, back through Hollywood and around Vallymount, like it's you know, I could drive it. So when I was, you know, people always complain about, you know, work and driving, and when I was in politics, yeah, it was difficult if you were leaving Greystones or Wicklow town at midnight in the winter and trying to get home. But I used to love driving around Wicklow, and I'd love stopping, meeting someone on the road, calling to a house, engaging with people. It's what the fabric of life is about. It's about taking in your environment, enjoying the landscape, the topography, and engaging with the people out there and interacting with them. And I must say it was tremendous. I was very, very lucky to be able to do that for a number of years. And as I say, when I was driving around a couple of weeks ago, you might meet someone on the road you know or something, and invariably if you've been in politics, you know, you're almost every homestead now. It's a thing that is probably unique to Ireland. You know, if an American, I would have distant relations in America, if they came here and I hopped into the car and said, okay, we'll drive over to Achill Island, and if you pulled into a small village and a forecourt to put diesel in it, there's a, you know, fair chance you can meet someone you know, and it's something that they cannot comprehend, you know, how you could drive for an hour or two and meet someone you know, whereas in Ireland you'll always meet someone you know. And I think from my point of view, having been involved in sport and going out to the army, been involved in politics, that no matter where you go, you have an association. And Irish people love to build up network and associations and whatever. And while we can often lament the many faults we have being human, there's one of our real strong points, and why we do so well in the likes of the States, when we go abroad, when we operate, and I saw Irish soldiers, the way they dealt with difficult situations in the Middle East. They go around that kind of overriding, warm, engaging personality. They can decipher what's any particular situation needs and respond accordingly. That's a great quality that we have as Irish people that we do take for granted that other nationalities don't have. And I don't mean that in the buy or sell you sense, I just mean it in the real good sense.
Thank you so much, Billy. I'll just stop the recording now.